equality. Today, I'm so excited to have on my friend Chase DeFelicio-Antonio, a reporter at the San Francisco Chronicle and my former colleague at the San Francisco Daily Journal. We covered law affairs there. We're no longer covering that, either of us. We're going to talk today about the newly formed Google union, what it means for workers, and what comes next for this union and other potential unions in the Bay. So we'll bring on Chase now. Hey, Chase, how's it going?
Good. How are you, Caroline?
I'm good. Good to see you on here.
Me too.
So I think we can just get right into it. You've been covering this union and its formation for a little while. How long have you been covering this, actually?
I mean, the topic of a unionization at Google, as far as like the kind of main, engineering and technology workforce, has been something that's kind of grown out of activism at the company that's basically existed since its inception.
Right.
There have been walkouts in recent years over the company's handling of allegations of sexual harassment, firings
Mhm.
over allegedly over organizing within the company among the engineers and those types of folks. So I think it's a good way to look at this is the actual announcement of a union, and we can get into kind of what that looks like and what it means is really an outgrowth and an outlay of that kind of organizing and really vocal workplace culture that's existed at the company really since the beginning.
Absolutely. So I wanted to know, basically along those lines, where does this union now that is growing in size fall within the evolution of Google's unions? Because we know that cafeteria workers in Mountain View have already unionized. We know that security guards have formed unions. Where does this fall?
Yeah, so this is an interesting formulation as far as the union is concerned. So when you look at the unions of cafeteria workers or security guards, shuttle bus drivers, they're pretty traditional unions that are affiliated with a group. Unite Here is one, SEIU, different chapters, Teamsters, and they're majority unions. Most people there are a member of the union, or all the people there are a member of the union, and they exist to negotiate a contract and working conditions with management. This isn't that. So this is reports are saying around 600 now. At the beginning of the week when this was first announced, it was over 200. So it is growing. Members of Alphabet. That could be anyone who works at Google, YouTube, engineers, subcontractors. The union's really open to anyone. It's organized through the Communication Workers of America. But this is it's not a union that is designed to or is legally able to negotiate a contract. That's not what this is for. It's more something that's trying to kind of cross between the core of engineers and people who make the Google products that we use every day, and then the core of people who are in those kind of support functions. So the shuttle bus drivers and contractors, subcontractors, and to create kind of a center or a fulcrum for activism, for essentially pressuring the company internally, but also publicly, as we've already seen this week, to make change and to kind of create the kind of culture and company that these folks want to see.
And when we talk about that culture of the company, what do they want to see?
Right. So I think that's what's going to be a really interesting side of this is as what this is going to develop into, kind of what these folks are going to want to see as far as how the company operates, the types of contracts it takes on. I think the way to think about this is it's probably going to continue to be a vehicle for continued activism around things like pressuring the company to be more transparent when it comes to pay equity among women and men in the workplace, or people of different genders and different diverse backgrounds. Also how contractors are treated, how sexual harassment is handled in the workplace, allegations there, but also the kinds of contracts that the company takes on.
Right.
I think in particular there is a lot of money in defense contracting, as we all know, and Google has certainly put its more than a toe into that in the past, but there's been forceful pushback in the past from the workforce, pointing to that founding ethos of "don't be evil." And why are we working with the Pentagon, for example, to work on technology that can be used potentially in a drone to maybe go and kill someone in a different country? That's not why we got into this business. So I think you're going to see more of that, without a doubt. But then also, recently, we can talk about this a little bit more. Yesterday, the Trump being not quite deplatformed, but getting pretty strong pushback from the the Facebooks and the Twitters of the world. They're able to weigh in on issues like that as an organized bloc, as opposed to just a group of workers.
Definitely. And when we talk about the group of workers included in this union, you said it is pretty broad. What does it mean for contract employees to be included in this union? I know in many cases, contract employees aren't allowed in an organization's union.
Yeah, so I think the distinction here, I guess, is that there's essentially there's full Google workers, folks who are fully paid and benefited, the more traditional workforce that might initially come to mind, and then there's kind of this large subcontract workforce that's kind of runs everything that makes the campuses work and beyond, and then there's also they do use independent contractors as well. But it basically means that this is an inclusive approach. The idea is that if they're able to include the concerns of everybody who works under the umbrella of Alphabet, or as many people as they can bring on board, that they're going to be able to pressure the company to look more like what its workers want to look like, as opposed to not having a voice, or that voice being really skewed towards the folks who are maybe more valuable to the company and more difficult to replace. I mean, it's easier to petition for change at the company, as we've seen at Google in particular, if you are an employee that they don't want to part ways with because you're valuable to them, and they know that you can, go across the street and go work at Facebook. I think they're really trying to take that bargaining power that they do have there, and then kind of combine that with the other folks who, for whom this is just a job and one that allows them to get by, but they're not necessarily making six figures and have access to all the perks and benefits there.
I really like that, because in a way they're helping leverage power for other folks. And oh no, okay, cut out. I think we're back now. But as far as contract employees, I do know that a lot of them say that they do the exact same work as staff employees. I guess this is more on the tech side. They just basically don't get benefits, or maybe they don't get paid enough. So I think that is great that it is inclusive that way. So, what were we going to say?
Oh, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think a lot of what this is about is essentially, and you make a good point that, we talk about contractors, we're certainly not just talking about shuttle bus drivers, and there's plenty of people who do the coding and marketing and the more traditional functions of a tech company who work on contract, because it behooves these companies to be able to hire and fire people quickly and to move contracts around depending on demand and workload. But those people traditionally have not had as much of a say in how the company functions and what it's all about. So being able to kind of find a way to include their voice is a real emerging form of unionization here in tech.
Definitely. And also, for people watching, I want to invite you to submit questions. So you can also submit thoughts or comments about the broadcast. Thanks so much. So, Chase, do you think the formation of this union will encourage other tech companies in the Bay Area to also unionize?
I mean, it's possible. I think the way to look at this is, particularly in the past year, I mean, discontent has really been growing inside a lot of big tech organizations, but also smaller ones. I mean, I think one really obvious example is the ongoing discontent inside Facebook over how that company has handled President Trump's posting, and in some cases disinformation about the election. And even over the summer when he was essentially instigating violence by posting things like when the looting starts, the shooting starts. I mean, that really made a lot of employees very angry, and there was a very forceful response internally and even in the media and publicly for the company to do something about that. And a lot of employees still feel that action was taken too slowly. I think yesterday we saw Facebook essentially suspend Trump's account up until January 20th or in the inauguration and maybe beyond. But I think tech workers really want to see a robust response from their companies. I mean, these are mission-driven organizations. People join them because they ostensibly want to change something in the world. And when the organization doesn't look like what they want it to, that really makes them feel dissatisfied and frustrated. So I think you can look at this type of union as something that could potentially be replicated as discontent kind of continues to be an issue across tech. And especially as social unrest continues and when workers want to see their companies not be apolitical, acknowledge that and take a stance and take, in their view, the right stance.
Definitely. And have you heard from workers about, from other companies about their wanting to form a union? Probably goes against their interest to tell you that also, but.
I mean, honestly, like, so for example, the Google union that we're talking about now, this is something that's been in the works for quite a while. It's affiliated with the Communication Workers of America, which is an existing union, but it really happened very under wraps. I mean, this was not something that leaked. It's a small-ish group of people at the time. It was over 200, but not so small that it couldn't get out. But I mean, I think there was a real effort to bring this to the fore, to announce it, to have it be really a moment here. And so I can't say that I can point to any other companies right now in tech where I'm either hearing of or it looks like it would really be ripe for this kind of movement. But I think you can pretty much guarantee that a lot of folks in tech are seeing this as an action and talking about doing something similar or affiliating with it or just starting to organize internally. I mean, I think that's how you get from 0 to 1 as far as unionization is concerned. It's people talking to each other and realizing they have some of the same interests. So I think this is probably galvanizing folks in tech across the Bay Area and elsewhere to at least talk about what their options are. And I think down the line, that's definitely a possibility that you can do more of this.
Definitely. And along these lines, and perhaps this is kind of obvious, but I think it's a good thing to discuss. Why is Google so averse to having a union, along with other tech companies? We know that at most tech companies, places don't have unions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's helpful to kind of look back at the history of Silicon Valley here and kind of why unions, even in the early days when it was more manufacturing focused and creating silicon chips and building circuit boards, that kind of thing, never really took hold. I mean, I think we think of these ideas of, decent pay, good pay, really good pay, and perks, benefits as, those are nice to have. But I think in the early formulations, a lot of that was really about making sure people were happy and didn't need to unionize, didn't want to unionize, giving them a mission, giving them decent working conditions so that they weren't unhappy. And unions were in the early days really seen as a failure of management. You're doing something wrong if your workers at any level are talking about unionizing, and it's almost like the organization that you work for, that's the collective that you're working towards, the mission there, and so you don't need a union. So that's kind of the way that tech has traditionally tried to get around that. I mean, I think that as far as unionization of that core workforce, that I don't think tech companies are really that concerned about that because there still isn't a majority push to make that happen in most places.
Right.
And in the early days, maybe in the last 2, even 3 decades of unionization of subcontractors, there was some resistance there from some tech companies. I mean, you look at protests that took place even at Intel in more recent years. But I think ultimately tech companies realize that it's a bit of a PR nightmare and maybe even a losing battle to fight your subcontracted workforce if they want to unionize. And increasingly, I think they just allow it to go ahead. They recognize them and they move on because, frankly, they can afford it. and it's really not worth the negative publicity and potentially worse for them. So I think their strong anti-union stance hasn't necessarily been as pronounced as directly as it has been. They've tried to get around it with other strategies in the past.
Right. Right. And you mentioned, the union here doesn't have a majority presence. What does it mean here that Google's union is a minority union?
Right. So I think this is also a really interesting aspect of what's going on here. I mean, as I said, traditionally, when you think of a union, it's a majority of people getting together, demanding recognition by management and saying, we want to bargain collectively with you for a contract, for benefits, and we want certain rights, and that's usually why people collectivize like that.
Right.
That's a process, though. If the company chooses not to recognize you, you can essentially go through this process before the Federal National Labor Relations Board. You can hold an election. If that's successful, then your union is recognized, whether the company likes it or not, and you have essentially the backing of federal labor law, which gives you a much stronger bargaining position.
Right.
Again, this is not that. If you look at Alphabet and Google, I mean, they have about around 130,000 full-time non-contract employees. Maybe some reports say roughly the same amount of subcontractors working for them as well. And so right now we're looking at the Alphabet Workers Union. It's got most recent reports say over 600 members. So that's obviously a small fraction, and they're not going to be able to go to that other level of unionization where they would negotiate for a contract unless they have a majority. I mean, they don't necessarily want or need to do that. That's not why they're doing this. But it's more about putting pressure on the company internally and in public to change their practices when they see something that they don't like. So it's not necessarily something that they want to do, need to do, or frankly would be able to do right at this moment, just because we're talking about so many people and they're dispersed across so many different offices, and it's there's more a lot of barriers to doing that. But that's kind of the basic difference between those two different kinds of unions.
Sure, thank you for that. And we have a comment here that says, early videos of Google campuses looked like mini utopias. What happened? And I wanted to ask you about the idea of Google's changing interests, perhaps changing culture, and the idea that might push employees to unionize, whereas maybe 10 years ago, working for Google meant something different. Do you think that it is the changing interest, like, I don't know, for example, the defense contracts, that also is making employees more keen to unionize?
I think it's definitely part of it. I think as the company has moved out of the garage, so to speak, and become less a kind of this brilliantly conceived scrappy organization into one of the largest and most powerful organizations and companies on earth, that what the mission of the company is, the drive from shareholders to take on lucrative contracts to make money, and beyond just what that initial "don't be evil" vision of the company is. I think that's really changed what the company is and what it's about and what it exists to do. I mean, I think if you go to the Google campus now, it still kind of looks like that utopia. It's still people biking around the Googleplex in the sun on multicolored bicycles. But there is some of that. But at the same time, as time has gone on and the workforce has kind of bifurcated into subcontractors, full-time folks, you kind of have these different conceptions of what the company really is and who works there. So I think it's it's probably still a fantastic place to work if you can get in there, but it's just become more complicated as far as what they're trying to do and who they work with.
Definitely. And we have a comment here basically replying to that question from Brett. He said they were never a utopia. Those campuses were set up to persuade workers to work longer hours and reduce divisions between work and personal time. I would tend to agree with that. And I wonder if workers have spoken with you about this, Chase.
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been a push and pull in the industry for a long time. There is this idea that come work for us. You can come make a difference. You can change the world. It's kind of this like cyber libertarian idealism that pervaded early tech, and certainly still exists in many sectors. But I think that also came with this trade-off of you're going to work and work and work, and your work and your life are kind of going to be the same thing, and that's what it takes. That kind of collaborative ability, but also just rugged individualism is what it takes to make a difference. And so I think it's also important to look at that in the context of unionization. I mean, if you tried to get a bunch of factory workers somewhere to just say you're going to sleep here and you're going to continue to work, and because that's what we're all about, I think people would probably have a difficult time with that unless they were really being paid very well or being given a lot of benefits. But if you're really paying someone, you're feeding them, and you're creating this world in which work is life, then you can really get that productivity out of people, and because they want to, for lack of a better way of putting it, as opposed to trying to force someone to work, them not wanting to, and then having a union on your hands.
Right. And as far as sort of white collar tech workers now, I do wonder about the idea of wanting to join a company like Google because you want to make positive change. I feel like if you signed up to work at Google today, you would have to weigh a lot of information about what the company actually does, again, versus what it maybe did 10 years ago. So just something to think about. And I think that would be interesting moving forward, how the union might be able to change the interests and the culture of the company. So we also have a really good question here, which is from Helen Wallace. She's wondering, is there an industry union for tech workers already established? So basically wondering, you mentioned a couple of examples before, but in the tech industry, is there like a tech industry union, perhaps like the NUJ for journalists, she gives as an example?
They're less unions, and they're more associations. There's a number of them, also nonprofits that also kind of collaborate among tech workers. Tech Workers Collective is one of them. And then, I mean, in this context, the Communication Workers of America, the CWA, is kind of the organizing, not force, but that's kind of what the organization the union that they're choosing to affiliate themselves with. And that group has also historically in the past been involved in attempts to organize other tech workers, particularly even in early Silicon Valley during the manufacturing days, not really very successfully. I mean, it's not like there's one particular union for tech workers that's out there, which is why you're kind of seeing an action like this. But there are, nonprofits, associations, collaboratives that are a little bit more loose and informal, but that certainly are, trying to create that tech for good ethos outside of companies.
Definitely. So Chase, those are pretty much all of my questions. I know that you mentioned there was an action by YouTube to, I think, remove some of Donald Trump's videos. You mentioned something about that. Did you want to talk about what that means in this context?
Yeah, so I think that's just a good way to kind of bring this into the present. Obviously, yesterday, Trump got a lot of pushback on social media from the companies themselves. As I mentioned, with Facebook, Twitter, a temporary suspension, and I mean Twitch, really across the board, and then YouTube, which is part of Google, which is part of Alphabet. They decided to kind of implement to take down some of his videos and other videos that are pushing disinformation about the election, but also kind of implement this point system for kind of creating a roadmap to potentially permanent ban. And the Alphabet Workers Union that we're talking about here released a statement about that. YouTube being obviously part of Alphabet, and saying that this is not enough. That this is too little, too late. We want to see stronger action. taken against this kind of information, taken against the president in particular. And I think that's the kind of thing that this kind of union allows you to do. Again, you're not able to bargain for a contract, but when something like that that's really in the news happens, it's not just individual workers or a small group of workers reaching out to a reporter or something like that, or releasing a statement. I mean, you're able to kind of have this center for activism and for speech at the company that people know represents a small portion, but a not insignificant number of people there. And I think it remains to be seen, how much does that drive change? Does it drive change? How much does that grow? But I think that's a really good example of where this goes, and the kind of action you'll see coming out of a group like this.
Definitely, that is a great example. And I'm sure releasing a statement through the union versus individual employees, potentially talking to reporters, impacts the individual workers' fear of retaliation from the company.
It does. I mean, whether or not you are unionized, workers do have certain rights in the U.S. under federal law. The ability to talk about unionization, the ability to discuss working conditions. But yeah, there is no doubt that being able to speak through the CWA and be able to speak through the Alphabet Workers Union, it creates a real protection, and it makes retaliation that much more difficult.
Right.
There certainly have been instances and allegations of retaliation by Google against individual workers in the past, firings in particular. I think this makes that a little harder, and it also runs the risk of a real, frankly, a PR mess for the companies, which in a really big way is just the thing that they're really most concerned about these days.
Right, that's not insignificant at all. So Chase, those are all my questions for now. Is there anything else that you want to add about this issue, about what workers have been telling you?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground. I'll be trying to put together a story in the coming days, and on kind of a little bit more the history of some of what we've talked about as far as organizing in Silicon Valley and the role of perks and benefits there, and then kind of breaking down in a little bit more detail what the unionization of subcontractors look like. So happy to maybe talk about that in the future, or just for people to take a look at that when it comes out.
Definitely. I'll be looking forward to reading that. And Chase, if people want to follow you on social media, would you mind spelling your full name?
It's DIFELICIANTONIO. The handle is just at Chase DeFelice, and DeFelice is DIFELICE.
Awesome. Okay, and folks, please follow me on Haps. If you want, you can follow me also on Twitter at Caroline_Hart_. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in today. I'll be back next week with another show. And thanks everyone for coming. Appreciate it. Bye, Chase.
Thanks, Caroline. Bye-bye.